Hi everyone. Today we're going to experiment a little bit with some watercolor paint and also some water-soluble materials. And so I've got some examples here that I've done to show you. And the first one that I was playing around with was something called a sketch and wash pencil. And that looks like this here, sketch and wash. And it typically comes in a pack of two. It looks like this, and you can find these usually in the pencil aisle at stores like Michael's, and they come with a pack of two with a pencil sharpener. So the great thing about this pencil is that it's water soluble, and so you can use it for a number of different mediums. Say for example you want to do a painting on canvas, an acrylic or oil or something like that, and you want to do a quick sketch. You can actually sketch with this, and if you're not happy with what you sketched, you can take a wet paper towel and basically just wipe it all down and it will come right off. So when it comes to watercolor, however, it will not come off necessarily, but it will become water soluble. So you can actually make a sketch with something and then paint with plain water, and you will wind up with what looks like a monochrome watercolor sketch. So okay. So basically, oh, before I forget, I did use this pencil to draw and then paint water onto the sketch and wash pencil for this example right here. Started off with just the pencil, then I went over it with water with the paintbrush, and then I went over it with what's called Caran D'Ache water-soluble wax pastel. We're going to get to those in a moment. Okay, another thing I was experimenting with are these pens called Elegant Writers. And Elegant Writers typically will come in a pack of 4, but you can buy them in different configurations. And Elegant Writers are water soluble. So if I take the cap off, you'll see it's in the shape of a calligraphy pen, but you get different size nibs. And you can use just the corner to draw, or you can use the thin and thick part as well if you want to get more fancy. And basically I used these pens to draw this tulip right here. And the great thing about Elegant Writer pens is that you can draw with them, and they're water soluble until they get wet with water. And after they dry from being wet, they become permanent. So if you're doing a drawing with Elegant Writers, and let's say you come in and you draw certain areas and then you wet everything, but you forget to wet one area. If that area gets wet again later down the road, because it has never been wet, it could run. But if it has been wet, it is said that they are permanent once they are completely dry. So the neat thing about these pens, and you'll see when we do our experiment, is that when you draw with them, you will see you will see basically black, and then when you bring a paintbrush with water in, you'll see colors, maroons, and kind of like a magenta maroon color, and then also these dark kind of grayish green colors or bluish green colors. And I'll show you how they work, and so you can actually not color them in if you'd like. But I do like the way the Caran D'Ache water-soluble wax pastels work with this medium also. So pretty cool. We're going to check that out. And then these over here are actually the Caran D'Ache water-soluble wax pastels, and you can see, you know, they look like crayons basically. Now the important thing to remember is to get the water-soluble wax pastels. These come in water-soluble, which means when you wet them, they will dilute and liquefy basically. Very nicely, I might add. They're very heavy on the pigment end and less heavy on the binder end. But they also have another kind called water-resistant wax pastel. If you get those are not water-soluble. So be careful that if you do want the water-soluble ones, that those are the ones that you buy. And so basically with these crayons or pastels, you would come in and you would draw into the areas that you want that particular color, and then you'd come in and you'd get another color and come in and draw that in, and it kind of feels like you're coloring in a coloring book a little bit. But the difference is when you take your paintbrush and you apply water to your, well, you'd probably use a smaller brush for something like this. But let's say you bring some water in and you apply some water to your color, you'll see that the color is rich and just really pigment rich and beautiful. So you can overwork them, so you want to be careful. And the other thing to remember is that if the Elegant Writer ink isn't dry, you may have some bleeding happening. So some people like the bleeding. I happen to like it because I like that extra dark outline that it leaves. You know, it's not for every painting, but it does look really cool in certain situations. So that's the Elegant Writer. Over here, what I did was I started out with, I just drew a basic shape of a tulip, and then I did that with a Sketch and Wash pencil. And you know, you can do it with any pencil, but if you want the pencil markings to dilute or become water soluble, you might want to try using the Sketch and Wash. So once I drew that out, then I wet the whole paper in this whole area right here, and then I dropped pretty colorful splatters of pigment, and I moved the paper all around. And then when I was happy with the way it looked, while it was still pretty wet, I got some rubbing alcohol. And this rubbing alcohol, when you spray it, it makes all little splotchy marks. Now you can see, even though it does look a little splotchy, it wasn't really the effect that I wanted. So I wanted more of these larger areas. So what I did basically was I unscrewed the top and I just kind of shook some droplets on. Now you can do it more intentionally. You can get something that where you're actually just dropping the droplet and then drying and dropping the droplet. So you could do it any way you'd like. But the cool thing about it is that it leaves these really neat marks. Now this color under here is Phthalo blue, which is it's a staining color. And so when I put my alcohol down, it didn't make as bright an outline as it normally would with a color that's less staining. But it did make some pretty cool effects. In fact, right over here, this looks like a little bit of a water droplet. I did not do that to the tulip itself. I only did it to the background. So you can do it to the tulip if you'd like. In fact, if you get creative, that could be a neat way to make the beginning of a water droplet and then come in and drop the shadow in afterwards. So once this whole background was dry, then I came in with, I wet this area one petal at a time, and I brought in watercolor, basically just straight watercolor paint, and brought my colors in and then brought it in down here and then let it dry. And then once that was dry, I came in with some Caran D'Ache water-soluble wax pastels, and just came around to my lower areas. I wasn't too crazy about the way this one turned out with those pastels, and I might just stick with a straight watercolor for something like that, or even consider working in some other medium, possibly an elegant writer, or even some micron pens once this is dry. So you've got, I love using these. These are Pigma Micron archival ink pens, and this happens to be an 005, which has a very, very thin felt tip. And so you can see over here I've got some examples of things that I've done with those pens, and creating texture and whatnot. Over here I used, on a dry painted area, I used this micron pen, and then over here on a damp area where the paint was still slightly damp, I went over, and you can see how it bleeds. Once this pen is dry on the paper, it will be permanent right away. It doesn't have to be wet like the Elegant Writer to become permanent once it dries that second time. So, okay. And that's about it. Down over here, I used straight wet on wet watercolor, and then I came in with some watercolor pencil here and there, just to accent it. And then over here, this is straight wet on wet watercolor, and I did this in individual sections, leaving some white area in between. Very simple. So, all right, well, let's get started. you.